Hey there, everyone. My name is Paul Glaze, and we are here with the Georgia Alliance for Social Justice for another Decode the Debate. In our series, today is about reducing mass incarceration and correctional control. The day is June 10th. And before we get started, I want to pass this off over to one of our panelists. And Maxwell, there's something a little bit more important that we wanted to start with first. Would you mind maybe just making sure that we center ourselves emotionally?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Glad to be talking with you. We wanted to take a moment at the start of this discussion to recognize the loss of a justice advocate who has impacted Georgia for many years in very large ways, and that is Marissa Dodson. She sadly passed away on May 21st. I'm going to share my screen here. And wanted to share this. So Marissa worked with the Southern Center for Human Rights since 2016, but she has a long history of working in Georgia and the Southeast, bringing people together to work on justice reform issues at the state and local level and the federal level, and has impacted thousands of people's lives, many in ways that they will never understand her impact. And every one of us who works in this field knows Marissa and knows her impact, and her loss will be felt for years, and it leaves a hole in the community's heart, and is a really powerful reminder to cherish life and the time that we have, and to make sure that we're using that time to help and serve others. If you knew Marissa and wish to attend her virtual service, there's information there on the screen. It's this Saturday, and there's an email that you can contact. So we just wanted to take a moment to recognize her loss and take a moment of silence, if we could, for her and her family and loved ones. Thank you, and appreciate it, Paul, for giving us that moment.
No, absolutely. That was that's a massive loss, and as you said, it's kind of hard to understate both the impact and the loss. So with that said, I think that she would be happy of the subject that we're discussing today, and that is mass incarceration, reducing mass incarceration and correctional control. But before we get started, would like to give y'all both a chance to introduce yourselves a little bit. And so, since we have heard from you already, Maxwell, I'd like to kick it over to Ann.
Hi, my name's Ann Colloton. I work at the Georgia Justice Project, and I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about GJP now, but I think I will, because it's a tie into what you just said. But our mission is to reduce the number of people in Georgia under correctional control and to reduce barriers to reentry. And so we do that in three ways. Criminal defense work in Fulton and DeKalb counties, where we have a holistic model where every client is paired with an attorney, but also a social worker. Reentry lawyering, where we have people with criminal records issues, occupational licensing, any barrier to opportunity once someone is released from the criminal justice system. And then policy change, which is the area of work that I do. I'm going to be talking about a probation bill this year, and we passed an expungement bill last year with the help of a lot of other organizations, and other reentry reform issues. So I would say that our reentry work started with Marissa. Marissa worked at GJP before she went to the Southern Center, and she helped pass the first expungement law in 2020. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. We're really happy to have you here, and to highlight the work the Georgia Justice Project does, and continue the legacy of Marissa. Maxwell, I know we've heard from you already a little bit. But now that you've talked about, other warriors for justice, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you, and thanks again for inviting me to speak on this panel. So my name is Maxwell Ruppersburg. Pronouns are he/him, and I serve as the director for Reform Georgia, and we are a justice policy think tank operating in Georgia. We're a nonprofit. We're all volunteer based, but we work at the state and local level, trying to collaborate with other agencies and organizations that are out there doing work by providing policy research, data research, and background information, as well as making policy recommendations at the state and local level. I'm born and raised in Georgia, and currently also work with the state of Georgia in the field of behavioral health in housing. And there's a lot of important overlap there that we'll discuss in a little bit. But I came to this work a few years ago, and we may share some more about our own stories. But again, really glad to be here. And I guess let me say, our organization, Reform Georgia, our goal is to help reduce and end mass incarceration in Georgia. But our focus is through policy recommendations and supporting the larger work that's occurring. So we're not a direct service organization like GJP is, who works with clients directly. We tend to work with the other organizations and sometimes with policymakers behind the scene.
Thank you for that. So Maxwell, we're going to start with you. And I guess the first thing is context is always everything. It's very important. How did we get here? Can you tell us a little bit about the history of mass incarceration, but specific to the Peach State, specific to us? And really just, we know we're in a mess, but how do we get into the mess?
So that's a big question. And so I'm going to try to give just a helpful summary for those who may be coming in kind of fresh on this topic, because it is very complicated and it's a long historical issue. It 100% ties back to the origins of the nation and the country's reliance on a system of chattel slavery that led to, with the end of slavery in the Civil War, there was Reconstruction, and in the aftermath of Reconstruction, there were a great deal of public policies written to intentionally segregate society, create a apartheid system of segregation, and ultimately those were codified into law. And we're all probably familiar with the term Jim Crow laws, which came from the period following Reconstruction. And those consisted of a great number of laws that were attempting to segregate all of society, limit the rights, civil rights and economic rights, political rights of Black Americans especially, but also non-white Americans. And through a long, historical struggle, as we're aware, in the 1960s, there was the Civil Rights Movement, and some critical legislation was passed federally that kind of changed the direction. But it also which meant that many laws could no longer directly discriminate against individuals on the basis of race. In the same way, fair housing laws were passed, in which laws could not be written, policies could not be written on the basis of an individual's race. But what we then saw was proxy policy, in which we saw a lot of policies written that had the intended effect often, or perhaps sometimes unintentional, though at the time it's fair to look at them and identify a lot of them as intentional, of disenfranchising, disempowering, marginalizing Black Georgians, as well as other Georgians of color, but in particular targeting Black Georgia residents. that took a lot of different forms, and it's evolved. And so what we now find ourselves with is one of the largest correctional systems in the US, in Georgia. We have long been a very carceral state, and it is important to recognize that it is the legacy of both political parties in the state of Georgia. So in the 90s, when there was a heavy movement towards being tough on crime, Georgia's governor at the time, Zell Miller, if I'm getting that wrong, hopefully not, was very adamant in joining that movement. And so while there were efforts to pass three strike laws across the nation, right, being tough on crime, and if you commit these 3 crimes, you'll go to prison for life, Georgia one-upped that situation and said, let's pass a 2-strike law. And so that was the tone and the energy, like the attitude with which legislators in the state were approaching the issue of crime and the correctional system, which meant we were very carceral, and we really leaned towards punishment to try to change society. And that was, again, I'm trying to highlight that was during the 90s when Georgia was under, Democratic leadership, right? That is no longer the case. And while we saw reforms, some effort at reforms that did advance during Nathan Deal's governorship, which, anyone who's been paying attention to this has heard about that. And there were some really positive reforms that occurred during his tenure. But we have started to see some of those roll back since he left office and under the new administration. And remember that these are legislature policies, right? So the governor is not writing laws, but he is signing them.
And if you don't mind, real fast, I want to highlight a couple of resources that Ann brought up. And Ann, I'm going to throw it over to you for these. And these are just really, really great places to start if you want to get more into this. And I will, the one I would love to point out is Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman. I was reading a book called The Price of Their Pound of Flesh, which is fairly recent, that talks about how that book actually got them started. And, Ann, could you tell us a little bit about, if you remember the story of how he's, going over a hill in Alabama and happens across this, or in Georgia, there's a hill that Douglas Blackman's walking on, and he comes into a cemetery and pretty much discovers, this massive unmarked cemetery. In his mind, he had never known it was there. And it starts this journey for him where he sees these connections.
Yeah, if you want me to respond to that particular part of the book, I don't remember that, but I guess I was just thinking I appreciated Maxwell starting from the beginning, because a lot of times people just start with the war on drugs, and maybe people understand the political, motivations behind the war on drugs and know that it wasn't just about stopping addiction, which, ravishes a lot of families. So I'm not trying to minimize that, but when you compare addiction to how our drug laws are enforced, that's where the problem lies, and the racism with which all the arrests and incarcerations and sentencing happens. But so just, I was trying to just echo and fill in for people who want to learn more from what Maxwell said about the film the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery for punishment for a crime, and how it connects all those steps to now. And if you haven't watched that or read the books, or you can watch the film Slavery by Another Name, or been to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, I highly recommend those, because it will, if you don't know the history, as we're talking about history in a lot of contexts here in Georgia, there's a lot of us who don't know, or didn't learn until we were much older. So start now.
And there's a lot of history to go through. One little nugget that I learned from Slavery by Another Name is that the founder of the man who designed and built Virginia Highlands was a very prominent what Douglas Blackman would call modern slaver. And there were constant, the brick factories that are famous for around Atlanta, where people would take prisoners and bring them in, and just literally work them to death. And it didn't mean to derail you there, Maxwell, but I wanted to make sure before we moved on too far that people knew there were some resources there available for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And reading a book, watching a film is a really great way to get introduced. There is never an end to educating ourselves on these topics, but that is a really accessible way. And another book that everyone will recommend in this arena is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And I think she's even updated a bit in the last year or so because it's a few years old. But she's a really great person to learn from as well. There's a lot of experts in the field to learn from. And Ann mentioned the war on drugs, which is also another big element, and we won't begin to unpack that. But that really kicked up in the 1980s, and obviously was a federal movement. But it contributed heavily to then this movement be tough on crime. That was equally championed by Democratic leaders, including Bill Clinton as the president at the time in the 90s. So just to give some context on current day and what our system in Georgia looks like, some numbers. So I'm big on numbers. We're heavy on data. The data in Georgia is kind of shocking, but we want it to shock you. It should shock you because it's quite bad. And it stands out in contrast to other states because of it. We have over 50,000 people in our prisons on any given day, and we have over 30,000, normally around 35,000 in our jail system, county jail system throughout the state on any given day. However, what I remind people is that is a daily population average, right? So that tells me how many people are there. I point to the number of admissions. So unique admissions, meaning people going through the jail door. And prior to COVID, the number was close to 240,000 unique admissions through Georgia county jails. That's 250,000, and our state has about 11 million people. And that was in 1 year. So we have an immense number of people being pulled into the local level correctional system for minor offenses, right? But that is the most common entry point that leads someone to probation, penalties, longer sentences, and potentially prison time, as well as all kinds of barriers. And Ann will talk about probation some, but we have the state's system is the largest probation system in the US, simply by total numbers. We are not the largest state, but we have the largest probation system in the US just by numbers, which means we also have the highest rate of probation. We have over 400,000 people on correctional control in just supervision. So individuals who are not incarcerated, but are having to report to a probation officer, potentially pay fees on a monthly basis as a result of their probation. And about half of those are felony probation, and a little more than half are misdemeanor probation. That is a lot of people. We, as a state, we have the highest rate of correctional supervision of the developed world. So whole countries are supervising fewer people than the state of Georgia. We tend to have longer probation periods. We have longer sentences on average. All of those result in the ballooning of our system, right? We have over 60% of people who are in jail on any day only there due to bail, right? They can't afford to pay bail. So all of these things create the need for people to stay behind bars or stay under a supervision system in which they're at high risk of errors that can pull them into incarceration. And it means that our system grows. It's very expensive. It pulls resources from other places like education or health resources at the local or state level. And those have bigger consequences. And that's part of this conversation around where resources should be allocated and how communities want to spend their own tax dollars.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, that lack of resources, the lack of places for people to go to for assistance in navigating this large Byzantine, perpetuation of the slave system that we have. I'd like to go over and hear a little bit from Ann, about Georgia Justice Project, about what y'all do, and then adding some more layers, to some of the the outline that Maxwell's laid out for us.
Well, yeah, I think Maxwell did a great job kind of just describing the history from slavery to convict leasing to Jim Crow to the war on drugs to today. And I don't have my slides here, just the history, but I mean, there are shocking. I'll try to find some, but it is shocking just how bad the U.S. is compared to other countries, and then how bad Georgia is within the country. So I will show a slide on that during my presentation about probation. Yeah, I don't necessarily have anything more to add other than that.
Absolutely. So then let's move into it. We did a little bit out of order with our overviews of your organizations, and that's great. Love it. But I think our next question is, I think a lot of people understand kind of the basics of the system, that that there is an issue that exists, that there is over policing, there is over incarceration, that it is a monetized system, and that there are people that have a financial incentive to keep people and to continually process. The question is, how did each of you get involved in this work? What led you to it? And when you have such an expansive criminal justice system, there's a lot of niches and there's a lot of places that you could focus your work. And so I was wondering a little bit of, how you found, kind of your space. And let's go ahead and start with Ann.
Yeah, I took a class when I was in college many years ago called Women in Prison, and part of that was reading narratives written by women in prison, but not just sort of book work, but every student was paired with a woman in prison to visit who didn't have really other family visiting them, just got to at least one person, and that was probably 30 years ago, and I still visit her when I'm in Michigan, which I'm not, but I lived there for several years out of college and still visit her, and then moved to the town, ironically, where her daughter lives, and got to know her daughter and husband and grandchildren. Still talk to her by phone, send her money to help buy basic necessities. So that was my introduction to it in college. And when I moved south and I started to learn the things we were talking about, the history of the criminal justice system, it gave me even more, passion for not just an individual person, but for the need for change in the system and just structurally and societally. And I started working actually at the Southern Center for Human Rights, and as an investigator in their litigation work, which was effective in some ways, but not always. I always kind of say Brown versus the Board of Education was absolutely needed to change what was going on at the time, but that never would have had the ruling that it had unless all the grassroots movement had happened to lay the groundwork for that ruling. So, we did litigation, but I think the grassroots advocacy is also needed just to change minds and change the conversation in society about why are we doing this and what's the consequences of us doing this, and is this really the best way, to create public safety, as we call it. So, and then in many years, I did a lot of other things for a number of years when I was outside of Georgia, but since moving back here a couple years ago, I started at GJP.
Thank you for that. No, and that's there are definitely not enough actual touches between people that are directly experiencing the system and the rest of us, and that makes it very easy to just kind of gloss over it or to go about your daily life. Maxwell, what about you? How did you find yourself in this arena, so to speak?
That's always a tricky question for me to answer. But when I went to college, I had that opportunity. I pursued history and religious studies, and so went down the liberal arts pathway, and really was really interested in learning about Southern history and African diaspora because it plays such a large role in American history, but especially Georgia's history, and that really exposed me to um, a wide swath of our past that I had really never been educated about, only tangentially, in broad swaths. And understanding the lines and the threads of history that do cross from, the transatlantic slave trade to modern day, um, are really kind of ground shaking, uh, for white Georgians when they learn about that. It's often something many of us don't grow up aware of because we're insulated from it by our identity. And I think it's important to recognize that and understand it's a barrier that everyone would have to overcome. If you're a white Georgian, it's likely that you aren't exposed to this information. That is not a privilege that our fellow Georgians, are afforded. So I went back to school to find a way to positively impact government, and ultimately pursued, a master's in policy, and came back to the state and entered local government, and found that there were opportunities to help organizations, and that the skill set that I had, which was, in data and policy research, that there was a need for that there were a lot of organizations doing really amazing work, but none of them have enough time, none of them have enough resources. And I had this resource of time and the ability to help. Ultimately, through meeting people, that led to the development of the idea to establish, a policy think tank that was really focused on Georgia, and trying to support the whole swath of work that's happening, because there are so many different areas in so many different issues. It's such a complex system. You tend to see an organization has to be focused on one part of it because you can't tackle it all. And Georgia Justice Project is a really great example of, they focused on this issue of reentry and record restriction. They can't solve it all, right? And there has to be a coalition, which is what you have in Georgia. But we really just wanted to become part of that and find a way to support it, and some of those capacity needs around data. And my background in local government provided me some insight into what moves local officials, what gaps of information they have, and what they need. And so the reality is that most of your local officials and state officials don't have a great deal of background or experience or expertise in these specialized issues. And so they're looking for guidance from advocates and from their residents. And in the absence of good information, whatever information exists will prevail. So we try to make sure that there's good information available where we can, so that hopefully that can prevail, and evidence-based policy decisions could be made.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and it is a perfect segue, highlighting the work of Georgia Justice Project and reentry, into a presentation that I know that Ann has worked on, that we're really excited for, and it's around a new piece of legislation that just came through. And how excited should we be about this, and what exactly are we talking about?
Hang on. Okay, this is looking different to me.
That's all right.
Are you going to share the screen?
Yeah, all you got to do is hit present.
Okay, there we go. So you're seeing my full screen here?
We are not yet. You're going to have to hit the from beginning again. For some reason, it didn't go through.
Is that working now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I think this is we're extremely ecstatic about Senate Bill 105 that passed this year. And here is just an example of why. Okay, so I know this is a small font, but you see this is a graph. Georgia is at the top. Those are all the other 50 states on the left-hand side. So Georgia is way out of whack, as Maxwell was describing, with the rates of correctional control. And when we say that, we mean everybody who's either incarcerated in a prison or jail or under some form of community supervision. So the red line is probation, which is what drives most of that, but not completely, because we still have the fourth highest rate of in prison incarceration rate in the country too. So it isn't because, don't let anybody fool you, it's not because we use probation as an alternative to incarceration, because we really just use it on top of it. And so sometimes people say it's because we have probation reform that drove it's not true. We just use it too much. So we have more people under correctional control than any other state in the country. And it is really driven by the long probation sentences. Many states have a cap on probation at 5 years or less. But in Georgia, 40% of our sentences are longer than 10 years, which really doesn't serve any purpose. Because most of the people who have been on probation successfully for at least 3 years or so are on what is called non-report, meaning they don't have to check in with the probation officer anymore. Nobody's checking in on them. They're really not being supervised. And so why have them on probation? That's a good question, and I don't know, other than to disenfranchise them from voting. And so Senate Bill 105 will immediately impact 50,000 people, potentially, and then more every month will also be eligible for early termination of probation if they meet certain criteria. So I'll go into that. So it's going to reduce that red line some. We will still, even after this passes, still have the highest rate of probation in the country, and so there's more work to do, but it is certainly a huge step in the right direction. So no surprise, given what we've talked about, that probation, just like every other part of our criminal justice system, is overrepresented. People of color are overrepresented at least 2 times in every state, but many states it's 8 or 9 times. So as I said, why do we have these long probation sentences? We really don't know. The first 2 years of probation, if somebody's going to reoffend, it is usually in the first 2 years. And so once somebody has made the 3-year mark and is doing well, then the research shows that more probation just increases the likelihood somebody will get caught up with a technical violation and get put back in the prison system. And removing somebody from probation allows them to move forward and get better jobs, and employment, of course, reduces recidivism. And so that this will help all of that as well. So what exactly does it do? So everybody who has been, okay, and I should just make sure everybody understands, this is about felony probation, not misdemeanor probation and not parole. So many people are on misdemeanor probation. As Maxwell said, we have over 400,000 people in Georgia on probation, and half of that is misdemeanor and half is felony. Some people, I think in the comments I saw about private probation, and private probation is only misdemeanors. Many counties outsource their probation supervision to private companies, for-profit companies. Felony probation is not privatized. It's only under the Department of Community Supervision. Not to say that there's not monetary incentive there, but it's not privatized. So, what makes somebody eligible for early termination, which is the new thing? If somebody has been on felony probation for at least 3 years and they met 3 other criteria: having no new arrests in that 3-year period for anything other than a non-serious traffic offense, have not had their probation revoked in the last 24 months, and by revoked, I mean returned to some kind of facility like probation detention center or a jail or a prison for any period of time, and they've paid all their restitution. And I should clarify that restitution does not mean all fines and fees, because most sentences don't have restitution. It's just certain crimes, certain offenses are given restitution. And so it's difficult to keep up with fines and fees, but if you're behind on fines and fees but have paid the restitution, then you should still qualify. So how does this work? Thankfully, it is not a petition-based system. Somebody doesn't have to, get a lawyer and file for this. And I should give a shout out to the Department of Community Supervision, because they are really, really doing great work in identifying and in creating like a technology to identify everyone who meets this criteria. So very efficient by comparison to many other criminal justice reforms. So if somebody meets that criteria, 3 years and those 3 things at the top, DCS will actually identify them through a computer query, give it to the probation officer, who will then provide the sentencing court with an order to terminate probation. And then the court must grant that order unless the prosecutor objects within 30 days. And again, there is a time frame, like within 30 days. So it doesn't just sit on somebody's desk for months or years and not being acted upon. I should also say, like, if somebody doesn't meet the exact criteria, you can actually petition the court, but it's usually helpful to have an attorney at any point asking for early termination of probation. But it's so much simpler now that we have this law where DCS will identify people and do that. But if somebody, if there's some other, you had one arrest or something like that, then you can still petition to do that without DCS identifying you. It's possible as well. So GJP can help if somebody is on probation and is not getting it through the proper way it's supposed to happen. If something is not working there, we can help in certain situations. So if someone is eligible, but DCS is not submitting the order to terminate, we can help advocate with a probation officer for that. If the court doesn't act within that 30-day time frame like they're supposed to, we can also help get involved then as well. Or if somebody has met the criteria but has an arrest that didn't lead to a conviction, we can also potentially help with that as well. Or if somebody had that order submitted and the prosecutor objected and there's a hearing scheduled, we can try to help with that at that point as well. And we did a full 1-hour webinar on this, and I can put that information in the chat. So if somebody wants to watch the full webinar that summarizes that and a little bit more, or goes more in depth, I can put that in the chat as well.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. That was really informative. And so I guess, today we're focusing on this new probation bill, and we want to talk about next steps, how to get involved. But I also want to make sure that we just kind of hammer home in very plain language. If you know someone who's on probation, what's the first step? Maybe they've been making their payments. They've been under there for a year or two. What's the first step for them? What is the first thing you encourage them to do?
Well, a year or two, I would say hang in there for 3. That's your goal. Get through 3, and then there is hope. So that's the light at the end of the tunnel. So after 3 years, like if you think, oh my gosh, I've been on 3 years. So DCS is going to start identifying people in July. I mean, a few people, because they've been asking for early termination for a while, their probation officers may have submitted that because they know about the new law. But in terms of like the mass search, the data query that DCS is going to implement, they're going to start that in July. And so if someone reaches out to the probation officer now and says, I think I might qualify for early termination, is that possible? Hopefully the probation officer will say, yes, you do. Or if they say, no, you don't, or what are you talking about? Or they'll say, well, you don't have a bid date, it wasn't written into your sentence, or you don't have one of the qualified offenses. That is when you should say, but there's a new law, because that was the confusion. There was actually probation reform in 2017 that was supposed to do just this, to allow people who are doing what they're supposed to do after 3 years to get early termination. But I think there was 50,000 people who were eligible and 213 received early termination. So obviously it was not working the way it was intended because there was different criteria, and the judges thought one thing, the probation officers thought another, and it just wasn't working. And so now it doesn't have to be written in the sentence. There's something called BID, behavioral incentive dates, which is one of the pathways to get early termination, but now there are other pathways as well. The second pathway had to do with certain qualified offenses. Again, if you don't need that qualified offense anymore, and so now it is open to everybody who meets those criteria. So if the probation officer says that, say, but there's a new law, it's called Senate Bill 105, and DCS is doing the best they can to train their probation officers, but as you know, there's probably tens of thousands of probation officers across the state, and some of them may have missed the training or not remember the training or whatever. So it might take them a little while to get up to speed, but mention Senate Bill 105.
And then, there was a comment from Jeremy Sharp, who's a civil liberties advocate up in North Georgia from Dahlonega. And I think it speaks to the fact that, there are multiple types of probation. And I was wondering, Maxwell or Ann, could you tell us a little bit about the different types of probation, or just kind of the different pipelines within this overall structure that people can kind of fall into? And does this bill apply to mostly all of them, or does it mainly focus on one or two of them, or, kind of in that realm?
Well, as I said, it doesn't apply to people on misdemeanor probation. Usually misdemeanor probation is a year or less. Sometimes they might stack things to make them longer, but it's only felony probation, is not parole. So in Georgia, you typically think somebody may have a sentence of incarceration first and then they're paroled, right? That's kind of the word that we tend to hear. But sometimes people then have probation after parole. So they've been out working, paying taxes on parole, and then they have more probation after that. Or somebody has a split sentence, so they say sentenced to 15 do 10 years incarcerated, and then 5 more on probation. Why it's probation instead of parole, I'm not really sure, but both of them are under DCS, but this law only deals with probation. But probation in Georgia, because of these split sentences, often looks like parole. So probably one of those situations, if somebody says, well, I've been on parole for 3 years, but now I have 5 years of probation, do I have to wait for 3 more of probation? Technically, yes, because this is only dealing with probation, but that might be one of those situations where if you've been on parole for 3 years and then, now you got probation ahead of you, that you might be able to petition outside of these avenues and for early termination if you're doing well also.
Thank you for that. And for anyone watching, if you put any comments or questions, onto this video feed, I can throw them up there. As always, much love and shout outs to Kimberly Carter. This really could be life-saving information. Thank you, Ann and Maxwell, for being here. And I guess a question that I have would be, when it comes to mass incarceration, we're fighting this war on multiple fronts. And this is a very large question, so forgive me if it's way too broad. But just from your seat, from where you're looking at, does it appear like we're making more progress kind of in this probation post-release world? Does it appear like we're making more progress kind of going head on to the prison population? Where are we at, and where can we maybe put a little more love into so that we can get play some catch up?
And what are your thoughts about that?
Wow, just throw her under the bus.
No, I don't mind. I just didn't want to keep talking, but
we love it when you talk.
I have to say that I'm feeling more optimistic than I have before, because I think our country is doing some racial reckoning that we haven't done before, and although some people really want to suppress the capacity for us to learn about our history, I think people are, and some people still won't, but more people are than have before. And I feel like the GJP was able to pass, this probation law and our record restriction law last year, which expanded what can come off a person's record after a period of time, because we had support from the business community, which is an odd thing for a person who works in a legal nonprofit or a criminal justice advocate to say, but we really did. The Metro Atlanta Chamber, the Georgia Chamber said this makes sense from a workforce development standpoint. If you keep people shackled forever, even after their sentence is done and they've paid their debt, it doesn't help anybody. And so they said, this helps people work, and it can be think of kind of like let people pull themselves up by their bootstraps, which I know is not always possible for people to do. So there's some problematic things from that. But I really do think that companies are starting to realize that we have 4.3 million people in Georgia with a criminal record. And if they're trying to fill open positions, and they have to look at people with criminal records, and they have to allow people to move on from their past mistakes. And they're starting to realize that this system is not just hurting the individuals in that system, but it's hurting the rest of us too by holding people back. So I think that's hopeful.
Yeah, I echo Ann's comments. I know they have been working on these bills for years, and this campaign, the Second Chance for Georgia campaign that they led, is multiple years in the making. So there's always reason to be optimistic, and we are seeing progress, and we're seeing people understand the impact of the correctional justice system, that it harms whole communities when we create overly punitive policy, and that systems that systematically target one part of our community hurt the entire community. So we're having some nationwide reckoning on that, but at the same time, every step of progress that has been made is a bill that could be reversed, right? And we've seen federal I was talking about civil rights legislation earlier. Like, we saw civil rights legislation get put to the wayside. The Voting Rights Act, right? We're trying to reaffirm that, and we're facing real challenges to that. So I say that we have reason to be optimistic, but every advance, it's 1,000 different places that we're making change, and all of them have the ability to fall back, right? And it's never really secure, but the more that we make everyone collectively aware, there's less opportunity for us to roll back and forget why we're making these changes.
No, absolutely. I'm putting something in the comments now from Ann, which is on that. Speaking of the Voting Rights Act, there's going to be a link in the comments for information for voting for people that do have criminal records. We want you to know you are not disenfranchised forever. Once your sentence is complete, you can vote. And I'm actually also, Ann has a wonderful 3-minute video with just frequently asked questions on that front, about voting with that. And I guess that, my last question before I ask you all to just tell people how they can, how they can get involved in this work. A lot of people do feel very passionately about this work, and they just don't know really how to get in and support, in a way that's actually meaningful and helpful. Would be, are there any provisions in the HR 1 for the People Act, that you would be excited about from a criminal justice standpoint when it comes to disenfranchisement, people with criminal records, anything like that? I know it's not subject of today, and that's a huge, long bill. So if that's let me dig into that, and we can talk about that another time kind of question. Completely respect and understand that. But just since we were on the subject, I wanted to make sure that I got it in there.
Yeah, that's probably my response, Paul. I don't want to speak incorrectly.
Speaking incorrectly is a very scary thing. I happen to be, excellent at talking about things that I know nothing about. It's a gift. That's why I went into politics. But that's also why we have people like y'all that really do, know their things and can, back them up much more adequately. And so I'm going to throw it over first to Ann and then over to Maxwell. How can people get involved with your organizations? What are some things that are going on right now that you might be looking for support on or for? And is there any, last words you would have for anyone that sees this?
Sure. I think I put my contact information in the chat. We have a campaign, grassroots campaign that works with our policy team. So during the legislative session, we will send out action alerts about how you can contact your legislators. We do a lot of webinars like this on whatever policy issue we're doing, or our direct service work, record restriction as well. We're part of a coalition called the Justice Reform Partnership, which has, especially during the legislative session, they have great educational things every Tuesday. It's called Talk Justice Tuesday. And that's another group where you can hear from various groups that are working on lots of issues, from juvenile justice reform, raise the age, police reform, along the whole spectrum of the criminal justice system. So and I guess if there's any lawyers on the call, if anybody wants to volunteer in our clinic, either helping people who are on probation or helping with record restriction and expungement, we do CLEs regularly and would love your help.
Absolutely. Can never have enough lawyers. And Maxwell, I'm going to go ahead and put your information here on the website there as well, that you just sent me. But how can people get involved over at Reform Georgia?
So specifically with us, if you're interested in policy research or data research, if you're a data nerd, we can certainly use your help. We are all volunteer. So we work on a few projects and do what we can. Please reach out to us through the website, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But my ask for people is not for donations, but because you should donate to Georgia Justice Project, not us. They're doing great work. But my pitch is that the justice system in Georgia is largely local. We talk about state issues because we have to, but we have 159 counties. There are 143 county jails. All of those are administered by a local sheriff. That is not controlled at the state level. There's not a governing body over our jails. So you at the local level determine who controls your jail. And your local officials, whether it's your city councilors or county commissioners or alder persons.
Or the sheriff.
Right. Or the sheriff or the district attorney, which is also an elected position, of which there are like 49, I think, and correct me if I got that wrong. Those are the people making decisions about your community and can pass these ordinances or new laws in the matter of days, right? Any day of the year. They're not restricted to session. And they are currently willing to listen to you, right? Like they're your elected officials. So if you haven't met them before, if you don't know who they are, please look that up and think about it. And think about, check out our website. There are a lot of local issues that are probably relevant in your community. And there's probably not a lot of people talking about them to your local elected officials because, they're hearing more about speed bumps in the community or this or that. And those can be important, but they need to hear about these issues from residents so that they know it matters. So much work can get undone at the local level if a local officials want to pass something more harsh, right? And we're seeing this battle between local governments and state government play out right now, right? We had the defund prevention bill, whatever you want to call it, that got passed in the last session. So you see that tension, but it's really important to get involved and be aware of who's making the decisions for your community.
Then no, it really is. I mean, I know it's the cliche, but all politics is local. And if you are someone that advocates in your local community and you're saying to yourself, well, even if we do all come together and pass something, they're just going to pass a state bill like 186. that's going to water it down or whatever. A couple things. One, like that bill, there are sometimes loopholes in that bill, in those bills that can be exploited. But two, at the minimum, you furthered the conversation, right? Because now the whole state has to talk about this tension between what a local community wants to do and what a governing coalition, might think is a different way of doing things. And that too can be useful. So if you see below, Ann was kind enough to put up a coalition of other criminal justice orgs. That's justicereformpartnership.org. If you are interested in kind of the intersections between this and, say, immigration policy, we have HIRA, which is the Georgia Immigrant Rights Alliance, that also does some work that is tangential and often, in fact, in direct, just lockstep. I would encourage you to reach out to them. I want to thank everybody for being on this today. We are the Georgia Alliance for Social Justice, a fairly new org, but we hit the ground running under some incredible leadership and under some new leadership of Ms. Fallon McClure, who is also just an incredible champion for a lot of these policies and a lot of this work. And Maxwell, I want to thank you so much for being here today. You have any last well, hopefully not last words, but any temporarily last words for the people at home?
Just thanks for having me, and check out GJP's website and social media and share the information.
Yeah, thank you again. Please check out one of those books or videos, find a way to learn more about this. And I promise you'll be motivated to find out how this is a reality in your community once you do. But bring a friend along and make them watch it with you. And then you can talk about ways to get involved. But thank you again.
We love our dismantling the system babies. They're the best. Thank you all so much. And everyone that's been watching, please share this video. Please tag someone you know that might be interested. Please point people in the direction of Georgia Justice Project and Reform Georgia. And have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Take care.